that it's. There we go. So again, thank you very much, ladies and gents, and I'm going to hand you over directly to Adrian. Thank you, Adrian.
Excellent. Thank you, Neil. And once again, thank you for the IOH for hosting these webinars and for giving me the opportunity to talk to everyone tonight. And of course, thank you to everyone giving up their evening to listen. I'm going to be talking about the ATS ERS 2019 standardization of spirometry update as we look forward and hopefully towards returning to health surveillance over the coming months. Whilst Neil touched on my background, I always feel it's important that speakers disclose everything about where they've come from and obviously what their background is, especially here as I'm going to be referencing how Vitalograph have implemented the new guidelines to support users. So following my sports science degree, I worked as a senior respiratory physiologist at Papworth Hospital, where I was surprised at the differences between testing fit adults and sick patients. I moved into industry as an application specialist for a leading pulmonary function manufacturer, where I was responsible for troubleshooting user problems and training on both theory and device usage. I eventually came to Vitalograph in 2013 and have progressed to being responsible for healthcare sales, service and support for the UK and Ireland. So I've been performing or providing training on spirometry and full lung function testing for more than 25 years. And it would not be an understatement to say that I've never experienced anything in pulmonary function testing like the last 18 months or so. We all hope for a steady return to something like normality. So here is tonight's agenda. So I'm going to start with why has there been a need for an update in spirometry guidance? What has actually changed? What is the implication of these changes? How to apply these changes in your day-to-day testing? Recent guidance.
Adrian, you're actually on mute.
Yeah, Adrian, you're on mute, bud.
Have you heard anything at all?
If you could go back over that agenda again, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll go back to the agenda. Okay, so what I'm going to do tonight, so I'm going to be talking about why has there been a need for an update in spirometry guidance, what has changed, what is the implication of these changes, how to apply these changes in your day-to-day testing, recent guidance on testing in the current climate and beyond, and then what we'll do is at the end, I'll address any questions that are posted during the webinar. So before I speak about what has changed, I think it's important to discuss why a change has been required. In 2005, the ATS ERS task force released a series of publications under the heading Standardization of Lung Function Testing. Now, number 2 in that series was standardization of spirometry. Now, prior to this, there was only the 1994 ATS Standardization of Spirometry update, but there'd never been a joint statement by the two societies. I think we forget how much the world of technology has changed since these guidelines came out in 2005. As you will see here, there have been significant leaps in technology since the 2005 guidelines were published. We have Google Maps. These were launched in 2005. The first video was uploaded to YouTube. Twitter was launched in 2006. The very first iPhone came out in 2007. Amazon Kindle was also launched in the same year. And then the iPad came out in 2010. And that's not to mention touchscreen technology that we all now take for granted and advances in electronic cars and batteries. Now, the ATS and ERS recognised that there were not just changes in technology, but they also wanted to include other improvements based on real data and on research. In their executive summary, they laid out their reasons for the update, stating that improvements in instrumentation and computational capabilities, together with new research studies and enhanced quality assurance approaches, have led to the need to update the 2005 technical standards for spirometry to take full advantage of current technical capabilities. They wanted to focus on helping operators get the most accurate results and on quantifying the quality of the data. Now, I'm not going to go through every change. After all, it's a 19-page document and we've only got 45 minutes. So here are the 11 key updates. So there are a new list of relative contraindications. There's tightening of spirometry accuracy. There's updated device quality assurance procedures. Operator training and ongoing competencies were addressed. There's an updated list of activities that subjects should avoid before testing. There's a focus on measuring both expiration and inspiration. Maneuver acceptability and repeatability criteria are updated, and the end of forced expiration, EOFE, was redefined. There's a requirement for spirometry systems to provide uniform cues and feedback to the operator. There were new withholding times for bronchodilators before bronchodilator responsiveness testing. There's a new grading system for the assessment of spirometry quality. And then finally, standardized operator feedback options for consistent reporting. Now I'm going to focus on 6 of these key updates. Namely, device accuracy and quality assurance procedures, changes to the acceptability and repeatability criteria, including the redefinition of the end of test and the new grading system. And finally, requirements for devices to provide uniform feedback during testing and to include standardized comments for reporting. Now, with regards to contraindications, list of activities to avoid prior to testing, and withholding times for bronchodilator responsiveness testing, there are tables and explanations for these available within the update itself. It is worth noting, however, that the term reversibility testing has been replaced by the term bronchodilator responsiveness testing. Now, this is to avoid any implication that airways obstruction can be completely eliminated or reversed. Now, the update also includes recommendations for operator training and maintenance of competency. Updated operator training is more important than ever with these new changes to the guidelines, in addition to the lengthy time since many operators have used their skills due to COVID. So let's start with spirometer accuracy and quality assurance. So, the International Organization of Standardization, so ISO 26782, covers the essential technical operating characteristics of spirometers. It includes new specifications for validation testing of spirometers, which replaces the previous ATS standard waveforms. These ISO profiles are better focused on accuracy and linearity and repeatability of modern digital spirometers than these old waveforms. Buyers beware, however. Just because a spirometer is available to buy, it does not mean it meets the requirements of ISO 26782. So it's always worth checking the specification of devices. Now, spirometer accuracy now is plus or minus 2.5%. So this is a reflection of the improvements in flow technology. Previously, devices only had to have an accuracy of plus or minus 3%. So it's worth checking if your spirometer meets this tighter accuracy requirement. Taken directly from the update, calibration verifications must be undertaken daily, regardless of flow technology. So I'd like to clarify here. A calibration verification is not the same as a calibration. A calibration verification is where you pump a known volume of air into the device to see if the device measures the volume correctly, i.e. is within this accuracy tolerance. The recommendation means that 3 liters should be used and the device should measure within plus or minus 3%. Now you note that I said 3% and not this 2.5%. The reason for this is you have to take into account the accuracy of the 3 litre syringe itself. And this is allowed to have plus or minus 0.5%. So this is what gives you this total of 3%. Now previously this would have been plus or minus 3.5%. Now if the device measures outside of this tolerance, then it may require a recalibration. While the technique is very similar to a verification, the difference here is instead of a check, here you are telling the device that you are pumping in 3 litres, and the device will calculate new calibration factors that will then be applied from then on. Now, the update states that regardless of the type of device, operators should always perform a verification each day that the device is used. Now, when it comes to pre-calibrated spirometers that can't be recalibrated by the operator, the guidelines still say that these have to go at calibration verification. Now here, where you could be using a disposable flow sensor, a new sensor from the supply being used must be tested each day. And if a new batch of sensors is used, then the verification needs to be repeated. The next statement within the guidelines is the measured volume at each flow must meet the accuracy requirement of plus or minus 3% for both inspiration and expiration. So it's recommended that the user performs this at a range of flows and the accuracy meets this plus or minus 3%, both inspiration and expiration, But what I'll do is I'll talk about inspiration a little bit later and go into why there's this new requirement. And then finally, if an inline filter is used in spirometry testing, that it must also be used during recalibrations and verifications. So finally, if the filter is used during testing, you have to use it when you check the device. Okay, so let's move on to acceptability and this redefinition of end of test. And this is where some of the fundamental changes have occurred. So I'm going to start with the basic acceptability criteria for FEV1 and FVC. Now, rather than looking at a maneuver as a whole, the update recommends that FEV1 and FVC are looked at separately from each other. So an acceptable FEV1 from one maneuver can now be looked at regardless of the quality of the FVC from the same maneuver and vice versa. Now, previously, we would have looked at the whole maneuver as a whole and to grade the quality of the whole test. Now, here is an abridged version of the table from the update. As I discuss concepts, we will slowly open up this table. So if we start at the top, so we've got here, we must have a back extrapolated volume of less than and equal to 5% of the FVC or 100 milliliters, whichever is greater. Now, this is applicable for both FEV1 and FVC acceptability. Now, this is a change from previous guidance because it used to be 150 mils. So they have tightened that up. So the next one, there is no evidence of a faulty zero flow. So you need to make sure that the device is zeroed before you perform a test. Once again, this is applicable to both FEV1 and FVC. Now, with the next two, there is a caveat. So it's slightly different for children aged 6 or younger. But with both of these, it's either no cough in the first second of expiration, which is applicable to acceptability for FEV1, but not FVC. And then the next one is there's no glottis closure in the first second of expiration. So this is applicable for both results. And then finally, must have no glottis closure after 1 second of expiration. So obviously with FEV1, this is after that first second. So this is only applicable for acceptability of FVC. Now, the two final ones are there must be no evidence of obstructed mouthpiece or the spirometer and no evidence of a leak. So obviously that's applicable to both. Now, before I expand on the acceptability criteria, it's important to discuss how the new guidelines have redefined what the end of a test is and this new term of end of forced expiration, so the EOFE. Now, previously, EOT, so end of test, was used to denote the end of the forced expiration. But these standards stress the importance of a maximal inspiration after the forced expiration. So what they state is these standards stress the importance of that maximum inspiration after forced expiration. So it's really important to get this through. So here are the recommended new test procedures. So a maximal inspiration followed by a blast of expiration, continued that complete expiration followed by inspiration of maximum flow back to the maximum lung volume. Now here's a standard flow volume loop. And the update recommends to do this complete maneuver. And the idea being is so you can look at the inspiratory FVC and the expiratory FVC to see if they line up. So the reason for the maximal effort to return to total lung capacity is if the inspiratory FVC exceeds the expiratory FVC, then this shows you that the subject wasn't at TLC when they began the forced expiration. Therefore, the reported FVC will be underestimated. Now, the easiest way to explain this new end of forced expiration acceptability criteria is to use a flow chart that's actually within the update. So, step one is to look for a plateau. So this is the most reliable indicator of complete expiration. And this remains unchanged from 2005. So have they achieved an expiratory plateau of less than or equal to 25 mils in the last 1 second of expiration? If it's a yes, then they've met the OFE acceptability criteria. If it's a no, then you move on to the next one. And this is looking at the expiratory time. Now, you may note here, there is no requirement for a minimum forced expiratory time. Previously, this was for a minimum of 6 seconds, which led to some valid maneuvers being classified as inadequate. If a subject expired consistently, everything within 5 seconds, then this was classed as a failure under the old guidelines. It has been found that forced expiratory times longer than 15 seconds, however, rarely change clinical decisions and needlessly fatigue subjects. So now it's acceptable to stop the test after 15 seconds. So once they reach 15 seconds, even if they don't have a plateau, they have met the new criteria. And then step 3 is to see if the FVC is repeatable. So subjects with high elastic recall may not be able to expire long enough to achieve a plateau, but can repeatedly achieve the same FVC. This would now be acceptable to meet the new criteria. And finally, if all else fails, there's the new usability grading, which I'll come on to a little bit later. So I'm now going to look at some examples. So here's an example where the old guidance would have classified a test as unacceptable. So here you can see that the subject is reproducible and had a plateau that was unable to expire for 6 seconds. So all of the FEVs were in 100 mils of each other, and the FVCs were within 50 mils. However, under the old guideline, this would have been classed as a session quality of only a C, which could have led to a recommendation for retesting. And this is despite the results being reproducible, and the only issue is that the patient was unable to expire, or was able to actually expire very quickly, so much quicker than the old 6 seconds. So with the removal of that 6 seconds, this would actually be classed as an acceptable test. Now here's another example. This is a young man who had reproducible and consistent FEV1s and FVCs. So here, FEV1s were within 70 mils of each other, and the FVCs were within 30 mils. However, they never reached a plateau and were unable to keep expiring for 6 seconds. In fact, they were empty within 2 seconds, but they were reproducible. They could get the same value time after time after time because of the high elastic recall. Now, because of this, under the new guidelines, this had a session quality of F. Under the new guidelines, once again, this would now be an acceptable test. So by adding the end of it forced expiration, we now have a more complete set of acceptability criteria for FEV1 and FVC. So as you can see, this first bit here that we've added back in is all to do with that end of forced expiration. So it's looking at the plateau, the expiratory time, and then is it repeatable? Now these are all only applicable to the FVC for acceptability. And then this second part, once again, is looking at that comparison between the inspired FVC and the expired FVC. So it's being used to confirm that the reported FVC truly is their best, and they did indeed start at full lung capacity. So this is saying that the best FVC inspired and expired must be within less than 100 mils or equal to 100 mils or 5% of the FVC, whichever's larger. Okay, so here's an example of what we've done within our software to aid the operator in knowing if their subject has met this new end of force expiration criteria. So firstly, there's the plateau. So this green bar appears when the subject has achieved an expiratory plateau of less than or equal to 25 mils within the last 1 second of expiration. And here is where the subject is expired for the 15 seconds, and you can either move to the forced expiration at the end of, the forced inspiration on either of these, or you could choose to end the test. Although the guidance does push for people to perform this inspiration at the end, it doesn't mean you have to. So if you wanted to stay just doing expiration, you could. Okay, so here is a flow chart on how to apply these new criteria for acceptability. It's pretty simple. Each time you perform a maneuver, you check the next step down. So we performed an FVC maneuver. So the first question is, have we met the within maneuver criteria that I just showed you on that previous table? If the answer is yes, you move down to the next one. So do we have 3 acceptable FEV1s and 3 acceptable FVCs? And once again, the difference here is they don't need to be within one maneuver, so these could be from different tests. And then finally, are the FEV, finally, we look at the between maneuver criteria. Now, we haven't actually got on to repeatability yet, so I'll move on to repeatability. And this also, I'm going to include in this grading. Okay, so it's an important thing to remember here is that FEV1 and FVC are now graded separately. Grading is applied to the set of maneuvers rather than individual tests. So it is the FEV1 across all tests and separately the FVC across all tests. so no longer from one test. Now, the repeatability criteria looks at the differences between the two largest FVCs or the two largest FEV1s. So you could have a grade A for FEV1, but a grade C for FVC. So if a subject is struggling at the end of the test, but performing the start perfectly, then the improved grading system recognizes this, informs the person interpreting the test on the quality of the FEV1 and the quality of the FVC. Now, in order to get a grade A, there must be at least 3 technically acceptable values which meet the repeatability criteria. And as the grades go down, so does the number of acceptable values required, and the window of repeatability enlarges. So, for example, grade A needs at least 3 acceptable, which are within 150 mils for greater than a 6-year-old, or within 100 mils for less than 6 or equal to 6. Going down to grade B, it's the same repeatability, but now you only need 2 acceptable. C is at least 2 acceptable, but this time within 200 mils, and so on and so on. Now, we also have at the bottom here a new grade, which is U, and this is to note usability, i.e. it's the best the subject was able to perform on that occasion. So let's say, for example, the testing was triggering the cough reflex. So they really struggled, and maybe you got one test, it wasn't perfect, it didn't meet the acceptability criteria, but it gave you a good idea of what was going on with that subject. Now, with F means it's neither acceptable, repeatable, nor usable. Essentially, it's garbage and does not represent a true picture of what the subject's lung function is. Now, with this, both U and F, it's down to your value judgment on whether you wanted to report that result or not. Okay, so now we have the full summary table, including acceptability, repeatability, and usability criteria. Now, there's a lot to take in and remember, which is why the update also recommends that devices include these new criteria and provide analysis and feedback for operators. Okay, so I'm going to start with a stipulation for clear post-maneuver feedback on quality. Okay, so the update states that the spirometry system software must provide explicit feedback to the operator, including, indicating FEV1 and FVC acceptability at the completion of each maneuver. Now, here's an example of what we've done to add that feedback to aid the operator. Of course, this is just a this is just a guidance, and you can override the system. So here it looks at each of those criteria for acceptability, with a tick meaning it's acceptable, a 0 meaning it is usable, and a cross meaning it's rejected. So here you have the ability to accept that test or reject it. Now, there's a lot of things to remember with the new update. So the aim of this requirement is just to make maneuver by maneuver analysis quicker and easier for the operator. Okay, now our post-test screen adds in further information to aid analysis. So here I'm showing the quality tab, and this is for a test that included 4 different maneuvers. So here you can see that once again, I've got those symbols for accepted, usable, and rejected. These are shown against each of the new criteria for each individual maneuver. As I said, users can override what the software recommends. And here we show the repeatability for FEV1 and FVC, both in terms of volume and percent. The dot is color-coded for quick analysis. So for this one, for example, it's a green, which means it is repeatable. Now, the next button along is analysis. Now, with the analysis button, this brings across the whole analysis page, which provides further information, such as overall repeatability and grading. The first box is color-coded based on how many were acceptable, followed by the FEV1 and the FVC repeatability. So here we can see this is a green session. So we have at least 3 tests, which are repeatable and acceptable. So that's green with good session next to it. And then we have good for FVC and good for FEV1. So once again, we're within that 100 mils and we're within that percentage. And then finally, underneath each of those, we have the grading. So for this one, for example, the FVC grade is A and the FEV1 grade is A. So it's no longer that session grade, it is grading each of those individually. Now, the next they recommend that operators use a standardized list of comments when reporting and that devices include these comments. So they've recognised the importance of your comments as operators. So operator comments are a key part of the report. The system must permit the operator to enter comments from a drop-down menu as well as free text. The aim here is to ensure that the same terms are used regardless of the site, the operator, or the equipment used. So here's an example of how we've implemented this requirement. There is the ability to select from the list of comments provided in the update or to add your own for each individual maneuver. So for example, I've selected test number 2, and we have things in here such as early termination, whether there was a leak, whether they coughed, and you can select those. So once again, it's that standardized comment regardless of who the person was doing the test and what device they used. And there's also standardized comments to report on the entire test session. So that first slide just showed you how we did it for each individual test. And then here is an example of how you can select from the standardized comments or add your own notes as per the requirements. So the bottom one, notes, is just your standardized comments. That could be anything you wanted to put in personally. Whereas the top one gives you this list of standardized comments. So once again, now we're looking at the entire test. So this could be more about what was the reproducibility like? How did the patient get on? Okay, so now I'm going to touch on guidance for testing in the current climate and beyond. As I said at the start, the past year or so has been the most difficult one for testing of any kind. Now, just last week, the ARTP and the Primary Care Respiratory Society, in conjunction with the British Thoracic Society, released guidance on returning to spirometry testing. Now, admittedly, this is focused, as is often the case, on secondary and primary healthcare and does not mention occupational health specifically. Now, despite that, there is some important recommendations that you could use in returning to subject testing, especially around infection control. And while spirometry itself isn't considered aerosol generating, there is the associated cough risk, which does need to be considered. So they've offered some risk mitigation strategies. The use of bacterial viral filters is possibly the most important thing, and it's backed by the statement by the ERS group on lung function testing, not just during COVID, but beyond, where they say that tests should always be carried out with a high specification, disposable inline bacterial and viral filter in place. And they recommend that it has minimum proven efficiency for high expiratory flows of 600 to 700 litres per minute. The use of disposable combined mouthpieces and sensors is not recommended at this time. Now, COVID isn't just going to disappear. And just like other diseases like influenza and TB, these are still going to be things operators should protect their subjects from, their equipment from, and just as importantly, themselves. At the end of the day, any spirometry is essentially a tube, and everything the subject blows out comes straight out the other end. A high quality bacterial viral filter ensures that nothing nasty is coming out at you. Now, an important point that made there by both the ERS and the ARTP is that not all bacterial viral filters are the same, and also that the use of them can have an impact on certain flow technologies. I will go into this in a bit more detail later. Now, other strategies they suggest are the spirometers should always be cleaned between patients per the manufacturer's COVID-specific instructions. As a minimum, this should include cleaning the outer casing of the transducer and the outer parts of the spirometer itself with alcohol wipes. Operators really should be using PPE, consisting of apron, gloves, visor, and a good surgical mask. You may want to think about perspex screens between the subject and the operator, give that additional physical barrier for protection. And if available, use a room where mechanical air circulation or ventilate as you are able. So this could be using open windows. Ideally, this should be in the region of 6 room air changes per hour, or maybe doing one subject at a time and moving from that room or moving to somewhere else, or just doing the one subject. Okay, so now I'm going to touch on bacterial viral filters. It is important that you check the characteristics of a filter, as not just any filter will do. A simple barrier filter is designed to trap expectorated matter whilst allowing viruses and bacteria to pass through. These were used to stop larger expectorate going into the sensor and affecting results. Instead, you should look for a filter that uses electrostatically charged material, as these also stop bacteria and viruses. You should be looking at the bacterial and viral filter efficiency rating. abbreviated to BFE and VFE respectively. And also confirmation that they have proven efficiency for those high expiratory flows of 600 to 700 litres per minute. Now, as a matter of interest, the NHANES reference paper used to calculate predicted values for peak flow, the highest flow rate they used was 827 litres per minute, which was for a 206 centimetre, 30-year-old Mexican-American man. So here are some examples of what you should be looking to from your filter provider. You want to get confirmation that the maximum flow rates the filter was tested at. For Vitalograph filters, this exceeds the 700 litres per minute recommended by the ERS and even the 827 used for NHANES. What you want to look for is their cross-contamination report. So you can actually look at what was done and how it was done. And then finally, the certificate of cross-infection efficiency. So you can be sure how effective the filter is and the level of protection provided. Now, I'd like to once again thank the IOH for setting this webinar up and for everyone who's given up their time this evening to listen to me. So I'll now try to address any questions that have been posted. What I wanted to do is leave plenty of time so we could talk about anything about the new guidelines, because we do appreciate there are a lot of things within the new guidelines and a lot of new changes to take on board.
Right, Adrian, the first one that has come up is whether you could give any guidance on restarting spirometry and any PPE that would be recommended. Oh, that's a really good one. That actually puts me on the spot a little bit. I'll give you an idea of what we've seen out there. So earlier this year, I went to, for the first time in a year, I actually went to a site and actually went to see some customers. So I went to Stoke Hospital. Now, admittedly, it is a hospital, but they've actually told me they've been testing since June last year, because what they've done is, it is a modern setup. So they do have the exchanges of air. So that is a massive help. They only allow one subject through at any one time. And by that, I mean actually through into the department. They are taken by one person and they were taken to one individual room. A lovely feature they had was there was an A4 photo of the operator, because obviously everyone's in masks, and what they found was subjects felt so much more comfortable putting a face to the person's eyes that's taking them through the testing. What they would do though, they would stay in that room, and that operator would only go to that room. So that would be their room for the afternoon, but they would clean it up afterwards. I think it's what you're comfortable with. I'd go for as much as you can. A physical barrier, I would certainly recommend. So if you can do it behind a perspex screen, I think that's a massive help. As I said, my background is as a respiratory physiologist. I would never do a test without a filter, and that's before all of this. So I certainly wouldn't change that now. I would use a proper mask, a good quality mask. Do wear an apron or anything. Certainly wear gloves. Alcohol wipes. Alcohol wipes are extremely effective. So using that to clean down anything that the subject would have touched. But I know there is a push, certainly from the associations, from the BTS, from the ARTP, from the PCRS, to get people back to testing. I think as much as anything, because people still need to be diagnosed. People still need to have their treatment assessed. And obviously with occupational health, people need to get to work. And in certain circumstances, they won't allow them to work until they've had some form of spirometry. I hope that helps. It does. I mean, I think certainly, I think the majority of occupational health departments that I'm aware of haven't returned to testing at the moment.
Yeah.
And I think that, there is great debate at the moment as to whether we should be, testing at the moment anyway.
Yeah.
And certainly the HSE, the latest guidance that I saw is that that we shouldn't be returning to testing just yet unless it's absolutely essential.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think routine testing, hold off. It's only on the essentials, and then it is a bit of a judgment call as well.
Yes.
What you're comfortable with.
I mean, for most of the, I suppose, the screening that we do in occupational health, it isn't
absolutely essential in terms of diagnosis or anything like that. It is a screening exercise, isn't it?
Yeah.
But you could potentially argue that at this moment in time, it isn't essential. But obviously, you know, you have to have robust policies and actions in place, you know, to try and mitigate anything down in terms of best practice. So you certainly should be, you know, at least doing the questionnaire and then finding out, you know, whether somebody is having symptoms that they didn't have before, and then potentially thinking about referring on to a centre that is doing it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's certainly worth it. And also, I think the other thing to bear in mind with those initial checks, we know there's a lot of people who are asymptomatic, so they will get through those checks, and they're still high risk. So yeah, I think it's a case of certainly not rushing into it right now. And if it's urgent and if you're uncomfortable, then yeah, forwarding that on.
Yeah, absolutely. There is, I think we've answered the HSE question. There was an HSE question about their viewpoint, and I think we've done that. Claire Davidson has asked, can you provide any information on when spirometry courses are going to be starting? Yeah,
well, I know that, so we have a vested interest. We do spirometry courses ourselves. I know that speaking to associations like Education for Health, they have gone predominantly virtual, so you can do it all in similar situations to this. I think that's fine to a point, but I think especially if you're new to spirometry, I think that you have to have some level of practical. I know that we are now, I'd say over the last month, we are getting inundated for requests for spirometry training. We've just employed a new application specialist. That was my original job when I left Papworth, when I worked over in industry. So it's something I've always thought is important. So we've employed a new lady who's on the call tonight, and we will provide her contact details, but she provides training for us. And we are now starting to offer it again.
Right, okay. And Neil Poole has asked, what's the cost of filters and can they be used on any of the spirometers?
So you're looking in the region of probably about 50 to 60 pence. There are lots of filters out there. I'll talk about ours because obviously I know about ours. We do several different models. So we do ones that obviously fit our spirometers. We also do models that fit most other major manufacturers of spirometers. And then we do a whole range of adapters, which tend to be for secondary care and full lung function equipment, which seem to have completely different fittings on them. So yeah, so we do different ones. After this, we'll provide links to our website. What I don't want to do is push what we do, but yeah, there are filters that fit multiple different pieces of equipment. You can get them as filters on their own or packs with nose clips. On my, if you can still see my screen, that filter in the bottom there, we have two versions. That's our new one. That's our Eco BVF. We do one with a short patient end, which is oval, and then that one we call that the bite lip. It has a slightly longer end because we just found that the subject just found that a bit more comfortable. So yeah, so yeah, essentially there are filters out there that fit any piece of equipment.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yep. So Charlene's just turned her camera on. So if you just want to say hello, Charlene, so everybody can
everyone.
Yeah, there we go.
There you are.
You're up and running.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the pleasures of modern technology and these meetings. There's never not a hiccup.
Absolutely. I think we have. Christine said that HSE have said that it can be done after risk assessment, but I agree. It certainly does mean that you would have to do the risk assessment, and the risk assessment may say that it's not essential.
Yeah.
So obviously that still does count. Suzanne's asked a question: is can current spirometers such as the Spirodoc have a software update to meet this guidance? And can this be done by Vitalograph during the annual calibration? Right.
So there's several points there. We're in a very good position that we're updating our software and hardware anyway when these guidelines came out. So the images I've shown you, which are in our software, that's in Spirotrac 6. So that's our new software that's just been released. Other devices out there, you will have to talk to your manufacturer. Now, we had to make the conscious choice to only have these new guidelines in our new devices. So the main reason being, you can see there's quite a lot of intricacies to these, and some of the older devices just simply don't have the processing power to do the calculations. So we've built our devices around having this. For specific devices, I would certainly go to your provider, whoever you bought the device from. You may have to consider that to meet the new guidelines, you may have to replace the device. That's something to bear in mind. To give an idea of what we've done, all of our older pneumotracs, so the PC-based spirometer, they can be upgraded with the new software. It just comes down to the actual firmware on the standalone, the desktop spirometers, where it might be a bit more difficult. So for us, Spirotrac 6 is a new platform, so it's available. It's available for purchase. It's not free, but we do offer a loyalty scheme for existing customers, so they can actually get it at a cheaper price.
Wonderful. I think we've actually come to the end of the questions, unless anybody wants to type anything in very quickly. So on behalf of, I'm going to turn my camera on, bear with me. So on behalf of IOH, thank you very much, Adrian. It's always a pleasure. What we will be doing is the recording will be available, but only for members on the IOH website. We'll also put some links in there as well. We'll probably put Charlene's contact details on the website as well for you. And obviously, I think Claire, you've asked if there is an attendance certificate. No, there isn't, because obviously, because of the cost of doing so, that would obviously probably take up most of the membership fees. So we don't offer a certificate of attendance. You don't need one. You only have to declare it on your hours for the NMC. And obviously then that is verified by your confirmation conversation that you have with your validator. So no, there isn't a certificate. And basically, thank you very much. And again, thank you, Adrian, and good evening, everybody.
Just a really quick one, just what we will also do, we will send you out some information such as that new guidance from the ARTP and PCRS and anything like that that we think would be beneficial for you to know about. And if you get any questions, have any questions after this, obviously feel free to either contact directly the IOH or one of us. But once again, thank you to the IOH and thank you for everyone for giving up some of your evening.
Wonderful. So what we'll do is we'll email that out. I've got the list of all the attendees. Yeah, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
I'm going to stop recording now.